Noah, Nathan, and Nolan didn't make a sound. The silence was terrifying. The mansion, usually filled with shouting, glass shattering, and guards sprinting to break up fights, felt unnaturally still. Lukas Reinhart paused in the doorway, his chest tightening. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was wrong. No laughter, no chaos. No boys running to him, desperate for comfort that never came since their mother died. He dropped his briefcase, voice breaking. Noah, Nathan, Nolan? Nothing. Room by room, he searched. The kitchen empty. The playroom untouched. His pulse quickened. In his world, silence meant danger, meant betrayal, meant something had gone terribly wrong. He pushed open the last door and froze. There they were, his 3 sons, kneeling on the nursery floor, small heads bowed, hands folded in prayer. And beside them, Marissa Hale, the maid he'd barely noticed in 2 weeks, was leading them in words he hadn't heard spoken in his home since his wife died. Thank you, God, for keeping Daddy safe today. In that moment, in the softest room of the house, Lukas Reinhart, Mafia boss, feared executioner, man who'd killed with his bare hands, felt something crack open in his chest. For 6 years, he hadn't cried. Not even when they buried his wife. But standing in that doorway, watching his children speak to a God he'd stopped believing in, the tears came. Before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. I hope this story reminds you that kindness and peace heals more than power ever could. Lukas Reinhart didn't recognize this version of his home, not because of the furniture or the expensive art on the walls, but because peace had never lived here, not since the murder. He once had a wife named Sophia. Warm, fierce, unafraid of his world. She made the violence feel distant, made the boys feel protected, made their fortress feel like a home. And then one Thursday night, a rival family sent a message. 3 bullets through the passenger window of her car. She was gone before the ambulance arrived. After the funeral, Lukas did what he knew best. He disappeared into his empire. Body counts went up. Territory expanded. Enemies vanished. He told himself the boys were fine, that the armed guards, the elite tutors, the rotating nannies were enough. That grief would pass on its own. But it didn't. The triplets, Noah, Nathan, and Nolan, grew angrier with each passing year. One broke furniture in fits of rage. One stopped eating for days. One woke up screaming every night, asking why God didn't save their mother. And the nannies? They never lasted. Some quit after the first day. Others were fired after failing to control boys, who'd learned that violence was the family language. One woman left crying after Nathan bit her arm so hard it bled. Another called child services. She disappeared before she could file the report. Until one morning, a soft-spoken woman from Georgia showed up at the service entrance with a mop, a quiet smile, a kind heart, and a Bible tucked in her bag. Her name was Marissa Hale. She was never meant to matter. She was just there to clean. But love doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just shows up, stays quiet, and changes everything. Lukas hadn't planned to come home early. The Sicily negotiation had wrapped up faster than expected, mostly because the other family's negotiator had made the mistake of insulting Lukas's late wife. That man wouldn't be negotiating anything ever again. Lukas told his driver to head straight back to the estate. Didn't call ahead, didn't see the point. The boys wouldn't notice. They never did anymore. When the black SUV pulled through the iron gates, he stepped out into the courtyard, loosening his navy tie. His knuckles were still bruised from the meeting. His suit jacket carried the faint smell of gunpowder and expensive cologne. He expected the usual sounds of his home, chaos, crying, or the cold silence that meant the boys had locked themselves in separate rooms again, refusing to speak. But when he opened the front door, he stepped into something unfamiliar. Stillness. No television blaring cartoons no one watched. No toys scattered like landmines across the marble floor. No shouting, no sobbing, no doors slamming. Just air. Quiet and untouched. He set down his briefcase slowly, his instincts immediately alert. In his line of work, unexpected silence was never good. "Boys!" he called out, his voice echoing through the grand foyer. No answer. He checked the kitchen, empty plates in the sink, but no one there. The library, books perfectly arranged, untouched. Even the security room, his head of security, Victor, was monitoring cameras but shrugged when Lukas looked at him questioningly. "They've been quiet all afternoon, boss," Victor said. "Creepy quiet." Lukas's jaw tightened. The silence grew heavier, pulling at something deep inside him he'd spent 6 years trying to bury. An ache he didn't let himself name. He started down the hallway toward the nursery, the room Sophia had designed before she died. The room the boys rarely used anymore because it reminded them too much of her. One door left. He reached for the handle, half expecting to find them destroying something or hurting each other. That's what they did now. They hurt things because they were hurting, and no one knew how to stop it. But when the door creaked open, Lukas didn't move. Couldn't move. 3 little boys on their knees. Hands clasped, heads bowed. Golden afternoon light, streaming through the windows Sophia had picked out, casting everything in warmth he'd forgotten existed. And beside them, Marissa, the new maid, the one he'd barely glanced at when she was hired 2 weeks ago. She was kneeling too, her teal-white uniform crisp and clean, her eyes closed, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you, God, for keeping Daddy safe while he was away." Noah, the oldest by 3 minutes, spoke next. His voice was small but clear. "Thank you for helping me not be so angry today." Nathan, always the sensitive one, added quietly, "Thank you for Marissa, and for making my stomach not hurt so much anymore." Nolan, the quietest, the one who'd stopped speaking almost entirely after Sophia died, just held Marissa's hand. But his eyes were full of something Lukas hadn't seen in 6 years. Peace. Lukas stood frozen in the doorway. There was no script for this, no protocol, no strategy, no logical explanation, only the sound of children trusting someone who had never promised to stay but stayed anyway. His chest tightened, his throat closed, his vision blurred, and right there, in the doorway of his dead wife's nursery, Lukas Reinhart, the man who'd signed death warrants without blinking, who'd watched rivals beg for mercy and shown none, who'd kept his face stone cold through his wife's funeral, started to cry. Silently, completely, shaking from the inside out. His hand gripped the doorframe so hard his knuckles went white. He couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Could only stand there watching his sons do something he'd thought was impossible. They were praying. Not out of fear. Not because someone forced them, but because they wanted to, and not one of them saw him. They just kept praying, their small voices filling the room with something that felt dangerously close to hope. That night, Lukas didn't sleep. He sat alone in Sophia's old study, the one he'd locked after she died. The one that still smelled faintly of her perfume. He turned on the lights for the first time in 6 years and stared at the family photos on her desk. Her voice came back like a whisper, something she'd told him once when he was planning a particularly brutal retaliation. "Power builds walls, Lukas, but love breaks them down." He'd kissed her forehead and ignored her. He had an empire to protect, enemies to destroy, a reputation to maintain. But now, sitting in her chair, staring at pictures of his sons when they still knew how to smile, he realized something that made his hands shake. He hadn't been protecting them. Cold, violent, alone. And the person who'd shown them a different way? The person who'd brought light back into the darkest house in the city? She wasn't a bodyguard or a therapist or an elite specialist. She was a maid with a Bible, kidness, and a stubborn belief that broken things could heal. Lukas wiped his eyes, stood up, and made a decision. Tomorrow, he would do something he hadn't done in 6 years. He would stay home for breakfast. The Reinhart mansion stood like a monument to control, all sharp angles and marble coldness, where even the air seemed measured and rationed. Lukas ran his empire from behind mahogany doors, and he ran his home the same way, with precision, schedules, and an iron fist wrapped in expensive Italian leather. The staff moved through the corridors like ghosts, speaking in whispers, their eyes trained on the floor. They had learned quickly. In this house, invisibility was survival. The triplets were 6 years old and already broken in ways that made the housekeepers cross themselves when they thought no one was watching. Noah, the eldest by mere minutes, had developed his father's stare cold, assessing, revealing nothing. He stood too straight for a child, his small shoulders carrying weight no 6-year-old should know. Nathan flinched at loud noises and counted things obsessively, steps to the dining room, tiles in the bathroom, seconds until his father looked away. And Nolan hadn't spoken in 8 months. Not since the night the shouting had turned to silence and their mother had disappeared like morning frost. The nannies never lasted. Mrs. Chen had quit after 2 weeks, claiming the boys were disturbed. Mr. Volkov, a former military man Lukas thought might understand discipline, had lasted 3 days before packing his bags in the middle of the night. The security team watched the children like they were tiny insurgents planning a coup. And perhaps in Lukas's mind, they were future heirs who needed to be forged into weapons before sentiment made them soft. Then Marissa Hale arrived on a Tuesday morning with a battered suitcase and eyes that had seen enough of the world to be surprised by nothing. She didn't flinch when the head of security briefed her on protocols. She didn't recoil when Lukas outlined his expectations: structure, discipline, academic excellence, no coddling. She simply nodded, asked what time the boys woke up, and requested access to the garden. The garden. No one used the garden, but Marissa did. That first week, she took the triplets outside with packets of wildflower seeds tucked in her apron pocket. Noah watched her suspiciously. Nathan counted the seeds 3 times, and Nolan simply stood there, silent as stone. She didn't force conversation. She just knelt in the dirt, dug small holes with her bare hands, and began to plant. Flowers need 3 things, she said quietly, not looking at them: soil, water, and time. Nothing grows overnight. Nothing worth having ever does. In the evenings, after their father's mandatory study hour, she read them stories not the classical literature Lukas approved of, but tales of knights who won through kindness, of lost children finding home, of dragons who learned to be gentle. And before they slept, in voices so low the cameras couldn't catch it, she taught them something their father had forbidden: prayer. Not for protection from enemies, not for strength to conquer, but for peace, for healing, for hope that broken things could grow again. The prayer circle was supposed to be held in their bedrooms, private, contained. Instead, Lukas found them in the living room, his living room, kneeling on the Persian rug his grandfather had brought from Tehran, hands clasped, heads bowed like some Renaissance painting of martyrdom. He stood in the doorway, briefcase still in hand, tie loosened from another 17-hour day of keeping the Moretti Empire from bleeding out. His jaw clenched. This was disorder. This was weakness seeping into the foundation he'd spent years fortifying. But then Marissa's voice rose soft and steady in prayer. And something strange happened. The anger that should have flooded his chest, that familiar, useful rage, faltered, cracked, like ice over a thawing lake. He left without saying a word. Over the following weeks, Lukas found himself lingering in doorways, standing in shadows, watching. Noah's golden hair, usually a wild mess that screamed neglect, was now combed smooth each morning. Nathan, sullen Nathan, who'd stopped laughing the day his mother died, was giggling at something Marissa said while chopping vegetables in the kitchen. And Nolan, his Nolan who flinched at every raised voice, was holding Marissa's hand as they walked through the garden, pointing at something in the rose bushes. The house felt different, warmer, like someone had opened windows he didn't remember closing. He should have been relieved. Instead, he felt terrified. They're becoming weak. Vittorio's voice cut through the silence of Lukas's study like a blade through silk. The consigliere stood by the window, backlit by the setting sun, his silver hair gleaming, soft. Lukas didn't look up from the contract spread across his desk. They're children. They're your children. Moretti children. Vittorio turned, his eyes sharp as flint. Sheep cannot lead wolves. Lukas, you know this. Your father knew this. The mention of his father landed like a fist to the sternum. Lukas set down his pen carefully, Precisely. What are you suggesting? The woman goes. Tonight, if possible. Vittorio moved closer, his voice dropping to something almost gentle, which made it more dangerous. And the boys need proper training. Structure. There's a military academy in Switzerland. Discreet. They'll learn what they need to survive in our world. Lukas felt the warmth draining from his chest, replaced by the familiar cold calculation that had kept him alive this long. Vittorio was right. He was always right. Sentiment was a liability. Love was a weakness enemies could exploit. But then he remembered Noah's laughter echoing through the hallways, Nathan's smile, Nolan's hand in Marissa's, trusting and small. I'll consider it, Lukas said, the words tasting like ash. Vittorio's smile was thin, satisfied. After he left, Lukas sat alone in the gathering darkness, torn between the man he'd become and the father he might still be. The envelope arrived on silver paper, delivered by Vittorio himself. Marissa didn't need to open it to know what it contained. She could feel the weight of bills inside, the heft of a problem someone hoped money could solve. 50,000 euros, Vittorio said, his voice carrying the smooth certainty of a man accustomed to getting his way. Enough to start over somewhere comfortable. The boys will adjust. They always do. Marissa set the envelope on the dresser without looking inside. I'm not leaving because of money, Signor Santoro. Then perhaps you need a clearer understanding of your position here. He stepped closer, and though he never raised his voice, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The Santoro legacy has endured for 3 centuries because we don't allow sentimentality to compromise our strength. You've served your purpose. Now, it's time to go. She met his eyes without flinching. I'm leaving because staying means watching you break them. But I won't pretend you're paying me to do it. When the boys found her packing, their carefully constructed composure shattered. Marco stood frozen in the doorway, his face blank with shock. Alessio grabbed her hand, his grip desperate. We'll be better, he whispered. We'll be perfect. Please. Carlo didn't speak. He simply curled into the corner, knees pulled to his chest, rocking slightly exactly as he'd done that first week, before trust had replaced terror. Marissa's hands shook as she folded the last sweater. She was halfway down the Cypress Line drive when the car stopped. Lukas stood at the gates, his hand raised. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he looked past her, toward the villa, where 3 small faces pressed against an upstairs window. Marco was crying. Alessio's mouth moved in what might have been prayer. Carlo's forehead rested against the glass. Even though the maid was only in their lives for a short while, the peace and kindness she brought into that chaotic mansion left permanent fingerprints on their hearts. She didn't preach faith, she lived it. In her gentle voice, her selfless actions, and the way she treated them as human, not burdens, the triplets caught a glimpse of something higher, something pure. And sometimes the people who stay the shortest leave the deepest spiritual mark. If stories like this move you, inspire you, or remind you that kindness still exists in this world, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing impactful stories that touch lives, spark reflection, and honor the goodness humanity still carries. Together, let's grow this family, one heart, one story at a time.